A woman spends 7 years quietly paying the mortgage on her family's home, sacrificing her own dreams, her own savings, and even her own chance at love, all to keep the people she loves safe. Then one night, while she is standing in the middle of the biggest achievement of her career, her sister sends her a text message telling her not to come to Thanksgiving dinner because her presence would make things uncomfortable. 1 hour later, a photo appears online with every family member smiling inside the house she has been paying for, and the caption reads, "This is what real family looks like. What she does next will change everything." My name is Grace Mitchell. I'm 32 years old, and the night my sister publicly decided who counted as real family, I was standing in the middle of my bakery on the evening before Thanksgiving, surrounded by the warm smell of butter and brown sugar and everything I had spent years dreaming about. The ovens had just gone quiet after 12 straight hours of preparation. The display cases were filled for the first time with lemon lavender cakes, pecan pies with bourbon caramel, and sourdough loaves that I had tested over 100 times until they were perfect. There was a banner taped above the front window that read "Grand Opening tomorrow," and every time I looked at it, my chest filled with something I had not allowed myself to feel in a very long time. Pride. Real unguarded pride. The soft opening that evening had gone better than I imagined. Neighbors stopped in. A food blogger took photos. A woman I had never met told me she had driven 40 minutes after seeing my posts online, and she bought 3 boxes of pastries to bring to her family Thanksgiving the next day. I remember standing behind the counter after she left, running my hand across the marble surface, thinking to myself, "You actually did it, Grace. You actually built this." And that is the exact moment my phone buzzed on the counter beside a tray of freshly glazed cinnamon rolls. It was a message from my sister Madison. I picked it up expecting something about tomorrow, maybe asking what time I was coming or whether I could bring an extra pie. Instead, the message said this: "Do not come tomorrow. We have already finalized the guest list, and your being there would make things awkward." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, slowly letting each word settle into a place that was already familiar with that kind of weight. I looked around my bakery, at the flour-dusted apron hanging on the hook by the kitchen door, at the framed photo of my grandmother, whose pie recipe had started all of this, at the tiny handwritten sign near the register that said "Baked with love and stubbornness," and I felt something crack quietly inside my chest. Not loud, not dramatic, just the soft sound of something that had been holding itself together for a very long time finally letting go. I set the phone down and I kept cleaning. I wiped the counters. I swept the floor. I wrapped the leftover pastries in wax paper for the morning. And I told myself that maybe it was just a misunderstanding, but it was not a misunderstanding. Less than an hour later, I opened my phone again and saw that Madison had posted a photo on social media. I showed my parents, my sister, 2 aunts, a cousin, and a few people I did not even recognize, all gathered around the big oak dining table in the house on Maple Ridge Drive. The table was covered with a cream-colored cloth. There were candles lit in the center, and someone had arranged autumn leaves and small pumpkins along the edges, the way my mother always liked. Everyone was smiling. My mother was holding a glass of wine. My father had his arm around Madison. The caption beneath the photo said, "This is what real family looks like." My mother commented underneath, "Grateful for my girls." My father left a red heart. 37 people liked the post within the first 20 minutes. Not one of them asked where I was. And here's the part that will stay with me longer than anything else. That house, the one glowing with warm light in the photograph, the one where my family was laughing and clinking glasses and calling each other real. I had been paying the mortgage on that house for 7 years. Every single month for 7 years, the payment came from my account. The property taxes came from my account. The homeowner's insurance came from my account. My name was on the deed. My credit was on the line. And not one person sitting at that table thought to save me a chair. I stood in my empty bakery alone, reading comments from relatives saying how beautiful the evening looked, and I felt something shift inside me that I cannot fully explain. It was not anger, not yet. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives only after you have spent years refusing to see what was always right in front of you. I picked up my phone and I typed one sentence beneath the photo. "Glad we cleared that up. Mortgage and taxes are your responsibility starting December 1st. The post disappeared within minutes. Someone deleted it or Madison took the whole thing down. I never found out which. But what came next made the silence feel like the calm part of a storm. My phone exploded. 40 missed calls. Text messages coming in so fast the screen could barely keep up. My mother crying in a voicemail. My father's voice tight and controlled, warning me not to ruin everything over what he called a simple misunderstanding. And Madison, my sister Madison, sending message after message that started with accusations and ended with something I did not expect. She wrote, "You cannot stop paying next month. There are contracts involved." That sentence stopped me cold because there had never been any contracts involving my mortgage beyond the original loan and my insurance documents. But what they did not know, what none of them could have known, was that the Thanksgiving dinner they had excluded me from was never just a dinner, and the documents, sitting quietly in my email inbox, were about to prove it. Before I tell you what those documents revealed, and what happened when I finally walked through the front door of that house with the truth in my hands, tell me something. What time is it where you are right now? What is the weather like outside your window? Drop your answer in the comments because I am genuinely curious to see how far this story will travel, and I promise you it is worth staying until the end. For 7 years my family treated my support the way most people treat running water. It was always there, it was always available. Nobody thought about where it came from or what it cost. And the only time anyone noticed it at all was the moment it stopped flowing. To understand why that Thanksgiving photo hurt the way it did, you need to understand how we got here. You need to know the story behind the house, behind the payments, and behind the daughter who somehow became invisible inside a family she was quietly holding together. My father, Richard Mitchell, spent 23 years running a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of Nashville. It was not fancy. The sign out front was hand-painted, the waiting room smelled like motor oil and cheap coffee, and most of his customers were neighbors and regulars who trusted him because he never overcharged and he never cut corners. My mother, Diane, worked part-time as a nurse at a clinic near our house. Between the two of them, we were never wealthy, but we were stable. We had dinner together most nights. We had a used car that ran. We had enough, and for a long time enough felt like plenty. Then the recession hit and everything changed in a way that none of us were prepared for. Father's regular customers started fixing their own cars or skipping maintenance altogether because they could not afford it. One by one the appointments on his calendar disappeared, and the bills on his desk grew taller. He held on for almost 2 years, borrowing against equipment, cutting his own pay, skipping meals, so he could keep his one remaining employee on the payroll. But eventually the shop closed. I remember the day he came home with the keys still in his hand and set them on the kitchen counter without saying a word. My mother made him a cup of coffee, and neither of them looked at me or Madison. That silence was louder than anything they could have said. My mother picked up extra shifts at the clinic, but the hours were unpredictable and her body was already tired from years of standing on her feet for 12 hours at a time. My father looked for work, but at 56 with no college degree and a resume built entirely around auto repair, the options were thin. They fell behind on rent 1 month, then 2, then 3, and they never told us. They never said a word. I found out by accident one afternoon when we were having lunch together at a diner near my mother's clinic. She opened her purse to find her wallet, and a folded piece of paper slipped out and landed on the floor between us. I picked it up before she could reach for it. It was a past due notice from their landlord, stamped in red with a final warning about eviction proceedings. She tried to take it from my hand, but I had already read every line. I looked at her across the table and she started to cry. Not loudly, not the way people cry in movies, but quietly, the way someone cries when they have been carrying a weight so heavy that even a small crack in the surface lets everything pour out at once. She told me they had been too proud to ask for help. She said your father would rather lose the house than admit he could not provide for this family. And in that moment, sitting across from my mother in a booth with cracked vinyl seats while a waitress refilled our water glasses, I made a decision that would shape the next 7 years of my life. I had just signed a contract to supply baked goods to a small hotel group in Nashville. It was the biggest deal I had ever landed, and I had been planning to use the profits to rent a larger commercial kitchen, maybe even put a down payment on my own storefront. Instead, I used almost all of the money as a down payment on a house for my parents. A 3-bedroom on Maple Ridge Drive owned by a retired couple who wanted a quick sale. The mortgage stayed in my name because my parents could not qualify for a loan. We agreed that they would cover the utilities and routine maintenance, while I handled the mortgage and property taxes until my father got back on his feet. We said 18 months. We shook hands at the kitchen table and my father looked me in the eye and said, "I will pay you back, Grace, every cent." He meant it when he said it. I believe that, but meaning something and doing something are not always the same thing, and my father never really recovered. The arrangement that was supposed to last a year and a half became the invisible foundation that held my family's entire life together. At first, I did not resent it. I loved them and I wanted them safe. I told myself that this is what family does, that support is supposed to move in both directions, and that my turn to receive would come when I needed it. But every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering slowly taught me otherwise. My sister Madison was praised for bringing flowers to Thanksgiving dinner, while I was the one paying the homeowner's insurance that kept the roof over their heads. Madison was celebrated for organizing my mother's birthday party, for choosing the decorations, and ordering the cake, while I quietly paid the catering bill that Madison sent to me afterward with a text message that simply said, "Here is the total, can you cover this one?" She never said thank you. She never said, "I owe you." She said, "Can you cover this one?" as if it were my job, as if it had always been my job, as if covering things was simply what Grace did. When Madison decided to start her own wedding planning company, I designed the logo. I built her website. I photographed her first 3 events for free, spending entire weekends hauling my camera equipment from one venue to another, while she smiled and took credit in front of her clients. And when she needed capital to get the business off the ground, I handed her $25,000 without interest. She called it a bridge loan. She said she would pay it back within a year or 2 at the most. 5 years later, not a single dollar had crossed back over that bridge, not one. And every time I brought it up, she changed the subject or told me I was being difficult, or reminded me that family does not keep score. Meanwhile, my own life quietly stalled in ways that no one in my family ever noticed or cared to ask about. I delayed buying my own home because my credit was tied up in theirs. I postponed expanding my baking business because my savings kept flowing into their household. And the hardest part, the part I have never told anyone until now, is that 3 years ago, a man I truly loved asked me to marry him. I said no, not because I did not love him, but because I could not explain why I had so little savings, why I was still renting a tiny apartment at 30 years old, why every financial plan I made had someone else's emergency built into it. I was too embarrassed to tell him that the reason I could not build a future with him was because I was still financing my family's present. He left. He moved to Colorado, and I heard through a friend that he got married last spring. I do not blame him. I blame the version of myself who believed that being needy was the same thing as being loved. If you are sitting here right now thinking that this story is just about money, you are wrong. This is the story of a daughter who spent her entire youth trying to prove she was worthy of love, only to discover that love was never part of the deal. And what I found in my email inbox that night, standing alone in a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and broken promises, proved that the people I had sacrificed everything for had not just taken me for granted, they had been planning to take even more. I stood in my bakery that night for a long time after the last guest left. The ovens were off. The lights above the display cases hummed softly. The smell of vanilla and toasted pecans still hung in the air, like a quiet reminder of everything I had built with my own 2 hands. I should have been celebrating. I should have been calling a friend, pouring a glass of wine, sitting on the floor of my kitchen, and letting myself feel the joy of finally arriving at a moment I had chased for years. Instead, I was leaning against the counter reading message after message from the family that had just told the world I was not one of them. My mother's text came first. Please delete what you said before the relatives see it. Not "Are you okay?" Not "I am sorry you were hurt." Just delete it, as if my words were the problem and not the reason behind them. My father wrote next, and his message carried the careful tone of a man who had spent his whole life avoiding confrontation. Call me right now. This affects more than you realize. I stared at that sentence for a long time, turning it over in my mind the way you turn a key in a lock that does not quite fit. What did he mean by "this affects more than you realize"? What exactly was at stake that I did not know about? And then there was Madison. 15 text messages in less than 3 minutes. The first one called me dramatic. The second one said I was humiliating our parents on the night before a holiday. The third insisted that the caption on the photo was just a joke and that I had completely overreacted. By the 5th message, her tone shifted from anger to something that sounded almost like negotiation. By the 10th, she was no longer trying to convince me I was wrong. She was trying to manage me the way she managed difficult brides at her weddings, with a mix of flattery and carefully placed pressure. And then came the 12th message, the one that changed everything. You cannot stop paying next month. There are contracts involved. I read that sentence 3 times. Contracts. There had never been any contracts involving the house on Maple Ridge Drive beyond my original mortgage agreement and the insurance policy I renewed every year. No one had ever mentioned contracts to me, not my parents, not Madison, not a lawyer, not a banker. The words sat in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples it created spread into places I had not yet looked. I set my phone down on the counter, wiped my hands on my apron, even though they were already clean, and did something I should have done a long time ago. I opened my email and searched for the property address. What I found made the floor feel less steady beneath my feet. 3 days earlier, a lender I had never heard of had sent me a verification request concerning a home equity line of credit on the Maple Ridge Drive property. At the time, I had assumed it was spam, the kind of generic financial email that shows up between advertisements and newsletters, and I archived it without a second thought. But now, standing in my bakery with my sister's words still glowing on my phone screen, I opened it again. I opened the attachment carefully, slowly, the way you open a door when you are not sure what is waiting on the other side. The application was detailed. It listed my parents as the current occupants of the property. It listed Madison's company, Magnolia Lane Events, as the primary beneficiary of the requested funds. And it listed me, Grace Ellen Mitchell, as the property owner, providing authorization for the line of credit. At the bottom of the document was a digital signature that looked enough like mine to fool a stranger, but not enough to fool me. My legal name was spelled correctly. My social security number was partially redacted but accurate. My old apartment address, the one I'd lived at before I moved into my current place, was listed beneath the signature. Whoever filled out this application knew private details about my life, the kind of details you would only know if you had spent time going through my personal records. They made one mistake. The signature was copied from an old vendor licensing agreement I had signed 4 years ago, before I changed the way I wrote the capital letter M in Mitchell. It was a small thing, the kind of detail that most people would never notice, but I noticed it the way A baker notices when someone else uses her recipe and gets one ingredient wrong. The shape was close, but the hand behind it was not mine. I stood there in the quiet of my bakery reading that document over and over while the streetlights outside cast long shadows across the floor. I could hear the faint sound of traffic on the highway, someone honking in the distance, the world moving on as if nothing had happened. And then another email arrived, this one from the lender's fraud department. The subject line was simple: verification request urgent. The message inside was even simpler: we have been unable to confirm your authorization. No funds have been released. Please contact us immediately. I set the phone down and pressed both palms flat against the counter, feeling the cold marble beneath my fingers. And suddenly everything about the Thanksgiving photo, everything about the guest list, everything about the carefully worded text message telling me not to come, all of it rearranged itself into a picture that made terrible perfect sense. They had not kept me away because seating was limited. They had not excluded me because Madison disliked tension, or because my presence might cause an argument over the pumpkin pie. They needed me absent because there was an investor at that dinner table, someone connected to Madison's new business, someone she needed to impress. They needed the house on Maple Ridge Drive to look like a family property, something owned and maintained by stable, successful people. They needed Madison to appear as the devoted daughter managing everything, and my parents to appear financially secure and firmly rooted in a home they had earned. My presence at that table risked questions. If I showed up, someone might mention the bakery. Someone might ask how I was doing. And someone might wonder out loud how my parents afforded such a nice house when Richard had not worked in years. My comment beneath that photograph had not merely embarrassed them, it had torn a hole in the exact story they were trying to sell that evening, and the panic in their messages was not about my feelings. It was about their exposure. I saved screenshots of everything: the deleted post, every text message, every email, and the full loan application with a signature that was not mine. And then my cousin, the one family member who had always been quietly honest with me, sent me a message that added the final piece. She forwarded the original Thanksgiving photo along with a short note that read, "I thought you knew. Madison told everyone at dinner that you chose your bakery opening over the family. She said you did not want to come. Grace, she told them it was your decision. They had not just excluded me. They had rewritten the story so that I was the one who walked away. For years I had wondered what I needed to do to become visible to my family, what achievement would be big enough, what sacrifice would be generous enough, what version of myself would finally earn their attention. Standing alone in my bakery on the night before Thanksgiving, surrounded by the evidence of everything they had done behind my back, I finally understood the answer. I did not need to become more visible. I needed to stop making their comfortable picture possible. Do you know what the most painful moment is? It is not when your family betrays you. Betrayal, at least, is something you can name. It is something you can point to and say that is where it happened, that is when things broke. No, the most painful moment is the one that comes right after, when you realize they never even considered it a betrayal. To them, using you was simply how things worked. It was the natural order of a family in which one person gives and everyone else receives, and the idea that you might one day stop giving had never once crossed their minds. Before I could even call the lender, before I could sit down and think clearly about what to do next, my phone rang again. It was Madison, and this time, instead of letting it go to voicemail, I answered. But first I did something I had never done before in a conversation with my sister. I turned on the recording feature. My phone announced it automatically with a short tone, the way it always does when the function is activated, and I wanted that. I wanted no private conversation that could later be rewritten into something softer, something more forgivable, something that made me look unreasonable and her look innocent. I had spent too many years watching my own words get rearranged by people who were better at telling stories than I was at defending myself. Madison did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She did not mention the bakery or the soft opening or anything about my life at all. She went straight to the point, the way she always did when she needed something managed quickly. You need to take that comment down and call Mom right now. She is crying and Dad is furious. I looked around my empty bakery at the chalkboard menu I had spent 3 days hand lettering at the row of mason jars filled with dried lavender and rosemary that lined the window sill, and I spoke calmly. The post is already gone, Madison. What exactly am I supposed to take down? You know what you did, she snapped. You made us look like we use you for money. I let her words sit in the air for a moment before I replied. You submitted a loan application using my signature. The silence that followed was so sudden and so complete that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind me and the faint click of the heating system cycling on in the walls. It was the kind of silence that tells you the other person was not surprised by what you said. They were surprised that you found out. When Madison spoke again, her voice had changed entirely. The anger was gone, replaced by a tone I recognized from watching her work with difficult clients at wedding venues, soft measured and carefully designed to make the other person feel like they were the one being unreasonable. That is not what happened, she said. Then explain what happened, I replied. Mom, and Dad agreed to help me secure temporary capital for the business. The lender needed routine confirmation from the property owner. Everyone assumed you would approve because the house is for the family. I felt the words land against me the way small stones land against a window, not hard enough to break anything but persistent enough to make you flinch. "The house is legally mine," I said, "and the signature on that application is not mine." "You are making this sound criminal," she whispered. "I am describing the document," I answered. She exhaled sharply, and I could hear background noise behind her muffled voice as the door closing, the faint clink of dishes being cleared. She was still at the house. She was probably standing in the hallway or the guest bedroom trying to contain me over the phone while the rest of the family waited downstairs in the living room, sitting inside the house whose mortgage I had paid every month for 7 years without ever being thanked. She tried another approach, slower this time, more deliberate. The loan was going to be repaid once my venue opened. This was good for all of us. Mom and Dad would have had additional income and you would have finally gotten some of your investment back. "That was not your decision to make," I said. "It became our decision when you refused to respond to my messages about the expansion," she fired back. But I had not refused. 3 weeks earlier, Medicine had sent me a business proposal with no budget, no repayment plan, and a demand for $120,000 by the end of the month. I replied that I would review a formal business plan. She never sent one. Instead, she apparently decided that my caution was permission to go around me to forge my name and to build an entire financial application on the back of a property she did not own. And then she said the thing that stripped away the last possibility that any of this had been a well-meaning family misunderstanding. "Tonight matters," she said. My potential investor was at that dinner table. I needed everything to feel stable. "And you, Grace, you have a habit of bringing up uncomfortable details." I almost did not respond. I let the sentence hang between us, because I wanted to be sure I understood exactly what she was telling me. "So, you excluded me because I might tell the truth," I said quietly. "I excluded you because you turn every gathering into a performance about what you have done for us," she answered. The honesty in that sentence was sharper than anything she could have said in anger. She was telling me openly that my existence at the family table was not just unwelcome, it was dangerous. I was welcome when a payment was due, useful when a crisis appeared, and disruptive when photographs were being taken. She continued before I could respond. "Delete the comment from your activities or call the lender and confirm the application. Then we can discuss Thanksgiving like adults." It was not an apology. It was an order disguised as reconciliation. "No," I said. "She called me selfish, jealous, unstable, and vindictive in under a minute. She said our parents had spent their lives supporting my little baking hobby, even though neither of them had visited my kitchen or tasted a single thing I'd made in over 3 years. She said my success had made me cold. She said no decent daughter would threaten her parents' home during a holiday." Every accusation was designed to shift attention away from the forged signature and place it squarely on my reaction. I let her finish. Then I said, "I am contacting the lender tonight. Tomorrow I am speaking with an attorney. Do not submit another document in my name." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You would not." "I already did the part you never expected," I told her. I said no. After I ended the call, I locked the bakery, pulled on my coat, and drove across town to a 24-hour cafe where Natalie Brooks was already waiting for me. Natalie and I had met in college when she bought a dozen cupcakes from me for a study group and paid double because she said they were the best thing she had ever tasted. She became a real estate attorney, and over the years she had quietly become the person I trusted most in the world, not because she told me what I wanted to hear, but because she never did. She was not the kind of friend who offered comfort before facts. That night, facts were exactly what I needed. I placed my phone, the loan application, and the screenshots of the deleted post on the table between 2 cups of black coffee that neither of us touched. Natalie read everything without interrupting the way she read legal documents, line by line, slowly, with her pen tapping the edge of the table whenever something caught her attention. When she reached a forged signature, she zoomed in on her phone screen, compared it with an old contract I had on file, and looked up at me. This was not casual, Grace. This was prepared by someone who had access to your records, not guessed. Accessed. I told her that my parents kept copies of old documents in the study at the house, and that Madison had a key. Natalie nodded, but did not rush to any conclusion. She pointed out that the application was not just a simple loan request. It included personal guarantees, a commercial lease commitment for a venue, and a projected closing date. "This is bigger than a desperate ask for money," she said. "This is a business plan built on your property without your knowledge." She searched the public business registry on her laptop and found that Magnolia Lane Events had been registered just 6 weeks earlier. Madison was listed as the managing member. My parents were listed as minority investors. I was not listed anywhere, and yet the financial statement attached to the loan application included the estimated value of my house as a family asset. "They built the entire application around your equity," Natalie said quietly. "Without it, the numbers probably fall apart." I felt something colder than anger settle into my chest. I had believed for 7 years that I was helping my parents keep a roof over their heads. They had quietly converted my generosity into a financial asset they could present as their own. And my sister had not merely expected another favor. She had incorporated my sacrifice into her business model without ever asking me. Natalie closed her laptop and asked me a question that nobody in my family had ever thought to ask. What outcome do you want, Grace? I sat with that question for a long time. The answer should have been simple. I wanted an apology. I wanted them to admit that I mattered. I wanted my sister to understand how deeply she had humiliated me. Feels vicious felt small next to a forged signature and a fraudulent loan application. I want my name protected, I said. I want the loan stopped. I want to know every document they have signed using my information. And I want them to stop assuming that I will rescue them every time they need something. Good, Natalie said. Those are actions, not wishes. Actions I can work with. By 2 a.m, an attorney named Daniel Mercer had reviewed the documents and joined us by video call. He explained that the attempted loan could expose my parents and sister to civil liability and potentially criminal investigation depending on how the lender chose to proceed. He advised me not to threaten, not to bargain, and not to accept any verbal promises. He also reminded me that pausing a mortgage without a plan could damage my own credit since the debt was still in my name. The lawful path was stronger and cleaner. We would notify the lender of the disputed signature, revoke every authorization, and require my parents to choose one of 3 options. They could refinance the property into their own names within 60 days. They could sign a formal lease at a fair rate, assume the taxes and insurance, and disclose all financial commitments tied to the address. Or they could move out within the legal notice period while I listed the house for sale. No more invisible arrangements. No more family promises, sealed with a handshake and broken with a text message. If your own family used your loyalty as permission to take whatever they wanted, would you still protect their reputation? Or would you finally protect yourself? What happened the next evening, when I walked through the front door of that house with the documents in my hand and the truth on my tongue, changed everything. I do not think any of them saw it coming. The next evening, I pulled into the driveway of the house on Maple Ridge Drive at exactly 6 o'clock. The sun was already setting behind the row of bare oak trees that lined the street, and the last of the autumn light turned the sky into layers of burnt orange and pale gray. There were leftover Thanksgiving decorations still hanging on a few of the neighbors' porches, small wreaths of dried corn and ripened pumpkins sitting on front steps, the kind of quiet suburban scene that makes you believe families are exactly what they appear to be from the outside. Natalie sat beside me in the passenger seat, her leather bag on her lap, her expression calm and steady in the way that only someone who has spent years reading legal documents and watching people lie across conference tables can manage. I turned off the engine and sat still for a moment, looking at the front door of a house that I owned but had never once felt like mine. "Are you ready?" Natalie asked. "I am not sure ready is the right word," I said, "but I am done waiting." Madison opened the door before I could ring the bell, as if she had been watching from the window. She was no longer wearing the polished outfit from the Thanksgiving photo. Instead, she had on a cream-colored sweater and an expression that was carefully arranged somewhere between exhaustion and accusation, the kind of face you put on when you want the other person to feel guilty for making you look tired. Her eyes moved past me and landed on Natalie, and her entire posture changed. "You brought her," she said, not as a question, but as a verdict. "I brought a witness," I replied. "This is a family conversation, Grace." "Yesterday I was told I was not family," I said. Those words landed exactly where I intended them to land, and Madison stepped aside only after my father called from the living room and told us to come in. The house smelled like leftover turkey and cinnamon, the ghost of a Thanksgiving meal that I had not been invited to share. My mother, Diane, sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa with a box of tissues beside her and her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The Thanksgiving flowers were still displayed on the dining table, autumn roses and dried eucalyptus in a glass vase, arranged the way Madison always arranged things, beautiful on the surface and designed entirely for other people to admire. Near the flowers stood a picture frame, the same one that had held the family portrait posted beneath the words, "This is what real family looks like." Someone had already removed the photo from the frame, but the empty frame still sat there on the table like a confession no one was willing to speak out loud. My father Richard started the way he always started when he wanted to control a conversation. He leaned forward in his chair, rested his elbows on his knees, and used the measured tone of a man who believed that staying calm was the same thing as being right. "We are all upset," he said. "Your comment created unnecessary panic. But we can fix this if everyone remains reasonable." I placed a manila folder on the coffee table between us. "Reasonable starts with facts," I said. Madison crossed her arms. "Can we first acknowledge that threatening Mom and Dad's home publicly was vicious?" she said. "I did not threaten their home," I replied. "I stated that I would stop paying expenses for people who publicly excluded me from their family." "You knew what everyone would assume," she said. "They assumed you owned a house that I pay for," I answered, "because that is exactly what you encouraged them to believe." My mother reached for my hand across the cushion, but I kept both of my hands on the folder. "Grace, sweetheart," she said, her voice cracking at the edges. The caption was Madison's idea. Your father and I did not mean anything by our comments. We thought you were busy with your bakery. I received a message telling me not to come, I said. My father looked at Madison. She stared back without flinching. I was trying to avoid conflict during an important evening, she said. Important because of Thanksgiving, I asked, or important because your investor was sitting at this table? The room changed. It was not a sound or a movement. It was more like the air itself became heavier, the way it does right before a summer storm in Tennessee when the sky goes still and the birds stopped singing. My mother looked down at her hands. My father's jaw tightened. Madison's arms dropped slowly to her sides. I opened the folder and laid out the documents one by one on the coffee table. Company registration for Magnolia Lane Events, the proposed venue lease, the home equity loan application, and a screenshot of the digital signature that was made to look like mine, but was not. I explained each document calmly, the way Natalie had coached me to, without raising my voice, without crying, without giving anyone the chance to call me emotional. Magnolia Lane Events needed capital. The loan application treated this property as a family asset. Mom and Dad signed on as minority investors. My signature was forged without my knowledge or consent, and I was excluded from Thanksgiving so that nobody at this table would find out that this house belongs to me. My father leaned forward. We did not forge anything, he said. The electronic forms were handled by Madison and the broker. Madison turned on him so fast that my mother flinched. You gave me the documents, Madison said. I gave you records because you said Grace had agreed in principle, he shot back. I said she would agree once she understood the opportunity, Madison replied. Their first instinct was not remorse or apology. It was separation, each of them scrambling to place one chair of distance between themselves and the consequences, the way people do when the building starts shaking and nobody wants to be the one standing closest to the wall. My mother began crying harder, pressing a tissue against her mouth. We never wanted this to happen, she whispered. We only wanted to help your sister build something. You have your bakery, Grace. She needed a chance too. That sentence hit me harder than anything else said in that room. Even now, even after everything, my success was not something I had earned through years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and dough under my fingernails. It was surplus. It was excess capacity available for redistribution to the daughter that actually believed in. I gave her a chance, I said. I gave her $25,000, a brand identity, a website, free photography, and 5 years to pay me back. Madison shook her head. You always keep score, Grace. Banks keep records, I said. Courts keep records. Businesses keep records. Only this family calls it cruelty when the records show who actually paid. My father raised his voice for the first time. Enough. You will not speak to your mother that way in our home. I reached into the folder and slid the property deed across the coffee table until it rested directly in front of him. That is another fact we need to correct, I said. This is not your home. This is my property. You live here because I allowed it, and the mortgage has come from my account every single month for 7 years. The words tasted different from how I expected. Not bitter, not angry, just honest in a way that I had never allowed myself to be before, because I was always too afraid that honesty would cost me the only family I had. Then my father admitted something that made the floor feel like it was tilting beneath me. He told me they had emptied nearly $80,000 from their retirement savings, almost everything they had left to cover medicines, venue deposit, consultants, and lunch expenses. They expected the home equity loan to replace that money before anyone noticed it was gone. Thanksgiving dinner had served double duty, a family holiday, and a private investor presentation, and several relatives at the table had been encouraged to contribute money. After seeing the house and hearing that Madison's business had property backing it, there it was, the second betrayal. They had not only risked my asset without my knowledge, they had used the illusion of my asset to draw other people's money in. I looked at Madison. Did those relatives receive written disclosures that this house does not belong to you, or to Mom and Dad, or to anyone in this room except me? She said nothing. My father whispered we were going to explain after the deal closed. No, I said, you were going to explain only if something went wrong, and even then I suspect you would have found a way to make it my fault. At that moment my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin. She had sent a screenshot from a family group chat. That morning, hours before I arrived, Madison had written, Grace is having an emotional episode and is trying to punish our parents because her little bakery opening did not get enough attention. Beneath, hid not a single correction from my mother or my father, not one word of truth. I turned the phone so all three of them could see the screen. Even before I walked through this door tonight, you were still lying about me, I said. Madison's face lost its color, the way a candle loses its flame. Not all at once, but in a slow flicker that left nothing behind but smoke. I stood up and handed each of my parents a copy of Daniel Mercer's legal notice. I explained the 3 options clearly. Refinance the property into your own names within 60 days. Sign a formal lease at fair market rate, assume the taxes and insurance, and disclose every financial commitment tied to this address. Or prepare to move out within the legal notice period while I list the house for sale. The automatic transfers from my business account had already been cancelled. The mortgage would continue to be paid from a protected account, while the legal process unfolded, but no one in this room would ever again treat the payment as an unconditional gift. My mother looked up from the pages with trembling hands. "Can you really just walk away from us, Grace?" I looked at the empty picture frame still sitting on the dining table, a frame that had held a photograph of every person in this family except me. "You walked away from me years ago," I said. "I'm only closing the account you kept open." The consequences began before I reached my car. Madison's investor called my cousin that same evening after receiving the corrected ownership information from Daniel. By the following morning, he had pulled out of negotiations entirely. Two relatives who had been considering investments demanded their deposits back immediately. The broker, suddenly eager to protect himself, produced a chain of emails showing that Madison had described me as fully supportive, but too busy to sign documents in person. One email from my father read, "Used the signature from the prior agreement. She will not object once the funds come through." My mother had replied to the email with a thumbs up. The lender permanently rejected the application and opened a formal fraud review. For the first time in my life, my family could not solve the problem by calling me emotional. Madison's investor withdrew completely. Within 3 days, the Magnolia Lane events lost its venue because she could not make the next scheduled payment. The original deposit was non-refundable, and the company owed cancellation fees to 2 contractors. She closed the business before it ever hosted a single event. Her announcement online called it a strategic pause due to market conditions. But the people who had been involved knew the truth. The same social circle she had tried to impress at Thanksgiving was now asking why she had claimed the house belonged to her family when it never did. My parents initially refused all 3 options in the legal notice. My father sent long emails arguing that 7 years of occupancy had created what he called a moral ownership interest. My mother left voicemails describing every sacrifice she had ever made raising me. I answered only through Daniel, and when the deadline reached 30 days, they finally signed a temporary lease, assumed the property taxes and insurance, and agreed to vacate within 6 months so the house could be sold. 6 months passed, and in those 6 months, the world that my family had carefully constructed on top of my silence came apart in the slow, methodical way that things come apart when the foundation is finally removed. I listed the house on Maple Ridge Drive in early spring, when the dogwood trees along the street were just beginning to bloom, and the air in Nashville carried that soft warmth that makes everything feel like it is starting over. A couple with 2 young children bought it within 3 weeks. They walked through the front door holding hands, and the woman turned to her husband in the kitchen and said, "This feels like home." I signed the closing papers without crying. I had already done my crying in a bakery on the night before Thanksgiving, and I had no tears left for a house that had cost me far more than what the bank had ever charged. My parents moved into a smaller 2-bedroom apartment across town in a quiet complex near a bus line and a grocery store. It was clean, safe, well maintained, and most importantly, it was within their actual budget. The real one, not the version they had been performing for years with my money holding up the curtain. They told relatives that I had forced them out. They said I had chosen money over family. They said their own daughter had put them on the street. I did not correct every version of the story. I had spent too many years of my life performing unpaid public relations for people who misrepresented me the moment I left the room, and I was done volunteering for that job. Madison sold her luxury SUV and took a position coordinating events at a hotel downtown. It was not the glamorous entrepreneurial life she had advertised on social media, but it was honest work, and part of her wages went toward repaying their relatives who had advanced money based on promises that were never hers to make. The $25,000 she owed me finally became what it always should have been: a signed repayment agreement with a modest monthly amount and a clear timeline. The number on each check was small, but the principle behind it mattered more than the math. What she had called a gift for 5 years had finally been named what it was: a debt. And then something happened that I did not orchestrate and did not expect. My cousin, the same one who had quietly sent me the original Thanksgiving photo, posted 3 things in the family group chat. The first was a text message from Madison telling me not to come to Thanksgiving. The second was a screenshot of the social media post with the caption, "This is what real family looks like." Third was a summary of the loan documents showing that the house had been used without my consent. She did not add commentary. She did not take sides. She simply placed the facts where everyone could see them and let the silence do the rest. The conversation in that group chat shifted overnight. Relatives who had called me heartless began asking Madison why she had encouraged them to invest money under claims that were not true. Relatives who had believed I chose my bakery over the family suddenly understood that I had never been given a choice at all. Madison left the group. My parents stayed but said nothing. I did not celebrate their humiliation. I celebrated the end of confusion. 2 months after the house sold, my mother called and asked if we could meet at a quiet restaurant near her new apartment. My father came with her. They were already seated when I arrived at a corner booth near the window, and I noticed immediately that they looked different. Not just older, although they did look older, but smaller somehow. The way people look when the scaffolding they built around themselves has been taken down and all that remains is who they actually are. For the first time in as long as I could remember, neither of them asked me to fix anything. Nobody slid an envelope across the table. Nobody mentioned a bill. Nobody brought up Madison's debts, or the house, or the lender, or the legal notice. My father spoke first, and what he said surprised me not because of the words themselves, but because of how specific they were. He apologized for the forged signature. He apologized for the lies about ownership. He apologized for the text message that kept me from Thanksgiving. And then he said something I had waited my entire adult life to hear. He said we favored your sister because her approval was easy to earn. She told us what we wanted to hear. You told us what we needed to hear, and we punished you for it because the truth made us uncomfortable. My mother sat beside him with tears running down her face, and she admitted that she had typed the comment grateful for my girls beneath the Thanksgiving photo, knowing full well that I had been excluded. She said she wanted the picture to look happy even though she knew it was a lie. Their apology was specific, and that is what made it different from every vague promise and tearful phone call that had come before. They did not say we are sorry you felt hurt, which is the kind of apology that puts the weight back on the person who was wounded. They said we are sorry for what we did, and they named each thing without looking away. I listened to every word, and then I told them something that was harder to say than anything I had said in that living room 6 months earlier. I told them that forgiveness does not restore access. I told them that I loved them, and that I believe their apology was real, but that love and trust are not the same thing, and trust cannot be rebuilt with a single conversation no matter how honest it is. We agreed to limited contact, one dinner each month scheduled in advance, no financial requests, no surprise visits, no discussion of Madison's debts or the business or the house. Trust would be measured in consistent behavior over time, not in emotional speeches delivered across a restaurant table. They accepted the boundaries. My mother cried again when I said I would not include them in my financial plans going forward, but she did not argue, and that restraint told me more about her willingness to change than any words could have. Madison's apology came later, and it came slowly. Her first attempt arrived by text a few weeks after the repayment agreement began, and it focused almost entirely on stress, pressure, and her fear of failure. I read it carefully and replied with one sentence: an explanation is not accountability. 2 months after that she wrote again. This time she named what she had done without blaming me for how I reacted. She said she had forged my signature. She said she had excluded me deliberately. She said she had lied to relatives about my absence. I acknowledged her message, but I did not invite her back into my life. Some relationships can be rebuilt. Others need to remain at a safe distance long enough for both people to understand what closeness used to cost. The following Thanksgiving, 1 full year after the night that changed everything, I hosted dinner for the first time in my own space. Not at the house on Maple Ridge Drive, not at a rented apartment, but right here in the bakery I had built with flour-dusted hands and 7 years of delayed dreams. I pushed 3 small tables together in the middle of the shop and covered them with a linen cloth. Natalie brought wine. 2 of my employees brought side dishes their grandmothers used to make. A friend from the farmer's market brought a bouquet of late autumn wildflowers. We were 7 people around the table that could have seated 8, and nobody asked where the 8th chair was because nobody was missing. Before we ate, I placed the empty picture frame from last year's Thanksgiving on the shelf beside the register. Next to it, I set a new photograph, one taken that evening of every person in that room laughing, holding glasses covered in flour from an impromptu biscuit making contest that Natalie somehow won despite never having baked anything in her life. I did not need anyone's permission to sit at this table. The empty chair was no longer mine. People sometimes ask me whether I regret that comment beneath Madison's photograph. I do not. It was not elegant. It was not gentle. It was not the kind of thing you say when you are trying to keep the peace. But it was honest, and after 32 years of choosing peace over truth, honesty was the only thing I had left that still belonged to me. Those words did not destroy my family. They exposed a structure that was already held together by secrecy, entitlement, and my fear of disappointing people who had absolutely no fear of disappointing me. My revenge was never about leaving my parents without a home or watching my sister's business collapse. My revenge was refusing to finance a version of the family in which I existed only as a resource, seen when needed, forgotten when photographed, and blamed when the bills came due. Blood can create a connection, but it cannot excuse exploitation. Love without respect becomes control, and generosity without boundaries becomes an open invitation for people to take more than they would ever dare to ask for openly. So tell me honestly, if your family excluded you publicly while secretly depending on your money, would you give them another chance? Or would you let them experience life without the support they never appreciated? Share your answer in the comments. And remember this, protecting your peace is not betrayal. Sometimes it is the first loyal thing you have ever done for yourself. This story left you with more than just an ending. This is a fictional narrative created for entertainment and reflection. We hope it reminds you that growth often begins not when you ask why someone hurt you, but when you finally ask yourself why you kept accepting what you already knew was wrong. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of the story. It truly means the world to me that you took the time to listen. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own boundaries or your own worth, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments. And if you have not already, I would love for you to subscribe to True Stories, the Tragedies, and Comedies of Life, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Every week we bring you powerful stories about real human emotions, about the moments that break us and the moments that make us whole again. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourself and take care of your peace.